I'm Ben Gonzalez. This is TDI. Well, today we're talking about flood insurance, why it's so important for you to consider buying it, and what happens if you don't have flood insurance. And joining us today is Gilbert Giron from FEMA. Gilbert is the Region 6 Flood Insurance Liaison. Welcome back, Gilbert.
Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for doing this. Well, everybody should know by now, but we keep telling them again and again, flood from rising water is typically not going to be covered by your standard home insurance policies. So let's start by talking about the floodplain and flood zones. Does that tell you whether or not you can or should get flood insurance?
It's a good indicator, but let me surprise the audience. I ask a question a lot when I do presentations. That question is, who lives in a flood zone? And I'll get a couple hands raised. But the truth is, the entire country is a floodplain. It's just a question of what risk you actually live in. So the answer to that question is it can flood anywhere in the country at any time. And we have seen this happen over and over again. But we do use what's called flood insurance rate maps to determine the overall cost of flood insurance premiums. But this does not mean people who reside outside of what we call the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area are not susceptible to flooding. In fact, we have seen in prior disasters a large number of structures outside, and we're talking 50, 60, 65% of these structures damaged are outside of FEMA identified special flood hazard areas. So even though the flood zones can be considered a somewhat of a predictor of where we expect flooding to happen, in reality, on the flood maps, it's just a little white line. It's called a boundary line. And that boundary line on that map is not going to stop the flow of water.
Yeah, there's not actually anything there. Huh? There's not a bridge that has to get across. Huh?
Absolutely right.
So with that in mind, then who should be considering flood insurance policies?
Everyone. And I do mean everyone, regardless if you reside in what we call the Zone X, which is an area of minimal flooding. That is an area we really don't anticipate to flood. But let's be honest, Hurricane Harvey, 52 inches of rain fell. That's unprecedented. That's not in our models. So I encourage everyone to get flood insurance. 1 inch of water can cost up to $26,000 of damage to modern construction homes. I don't have that type of money in savings to repair a home from a flooding event. So even a modest amount of flood insurance coverage, it doesn't have to be a lot. You know, you can buy the coverage that you could afford. And if you can afford the statutory limits of $250,000 building, $100,000 content, that's even better. It's going to help you rebuild. But in reality, everyone should have some coverage for the peril of flooding. It is a single peril policy. As you mentioned, it is not covered under your standard homeowner's insurance policy. The owner will be left with the bill after a flooding event if they do not have flood insurance.
All right, so we know that a lot of damage happens outside those floodplains, but where you live is going to kind of affect what you'll pay for coverage. Is there somewhere you can go to kind of see if you're in or out, or what your personal home's risk of flooding is?
That's a great question. I would first encourage the insured, the citizens, to reach out to the local floodplain administrator. Every community who participates in the National Flood Insurance Program has agreed to identify a member of their administration to act as a floodplain manager, floodplain specialist, something to that regard. And they should have a good idea of the perils of flooding for their jurisdictional boundaries. And if that's not the case, you can always reach out. We have a series of websites. And you can do a search on any search engine. Just type in FEMA Map Service Center. It's an interactive website. It's very user intuitive. And what you do is you simply put in your address and it will populate on a map. And then you can zoom in and you can see where in close proximity you are to any special flood hazard areas.
Now, Gilbert, that first one that you mentioned about calling your local resources, what kind of people are those? Is that county or city? Or depends, I guess.
Yeah, it depends. Each community that has a jurisdictional border, if they're incorporated, they're required to join the NFIP on their own. So if you live in an unincorporated county, then the county would identify a special, what we call a floodplain manager. If you live in, for example, a city, even a small city such as Little Elm, where I reside up in North Texas. They have a floodplain manager identified. In large cities, of course, they normally have a very large staff. So if it's incorporated and they have jurisdictional boundaries, more than likely, if they're participating members in NFIP, and we only have a handful in Texas who are not, they will have a floodplain administrator identified for questions and answers for their citizens.
Perfect. Okay. So we know that after a disaster, occasionally, if it's been a designated type of disaster, FEMA can offer that individual assistance. But that's not the same thing as flood insurance coverage, right?
No, it's not. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because we have a lot of confusion between what is flood insurance and what is disaster assistance. First off, flood insurance is a contract between the insured and one of our, what we call, write your own partners. It's someone who writes flood insurance on our behalf. All you need to submit a claim is for the definition of a flood to have been met, and that is very simple. It could be 2 or more acres of normally dry land that's been inundated with waters, or 2 or more properties, one of which has a insurance policy holder. That is our definition of flood. Very easy to meet. As long as that definition of flood has been met, the homeowner can simply call their insurance provider and initiate a claim. They will be sent an adjuster as soon as it's allowed. Smaller scale events, adjusters normally arrive within a week to 2 weeks. Larger scale events such as Hurricane Harvey, where we are just overwhelmed, can take a little bit longer for adjusters to arrive, but adjusters will arrive nonetheless. The important thing is, you do not have to have a disaster declared by the president to initiate a insurance claim. Moving over to disaster assistance, first and foremost, nothing can be done until that disaster has been declared a presidentially declared disaster and the FEMA apparatus has been unleashed to be able to provide assistance in these areas. We do see that happen on large-scale events, your Hurricane Harvey, your Zetas, but we often see a lot of times that the criteria is not met for disaster assistance. So people who are relying on disaster assistance are, there's nothing available. And something else to remember is disaster assistance is type of an award. It's based on individual characteristics. Okay, no one's ever going to receive the same amount, and very rarely does anyone ever receive the maximum amount. Hurricane Harvey, for example, the average disaster assistance payout was under $5,000.
Mm-hmm. That's not going to fix a home that's been severely damaged.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to do a lot. Maybe renovate one room, make it livable while you're addressing the rest of the house. But as I mentioned earlier, 1 inch of water can cost up to $26,000. Now, move back to flood insurance. You can get a $250,000 is the maximum allowed for a residential property. For non-residential, commercial, you can go up to $500,000. So the benefits are easily seen for flood insurance. You have to justify the cost. If you live close to water, understand that there is always the risk and peril of flooding. And, we say it before, and we're going to continue to say it, is standards homeowners insurance don't cover flooding. So you have to foot the bill for repairs one way or the other. Might as well have flood insurance and have them help you get back into the way you were before that flooding event happened.
Yeah, usually when I'm thinking about flood insurance versus that FEMA flood assistance, I'm thinking about the cost, the different levels of benefits that are available. But you brought up a good point. There may not be a disaster designation. It may be localized type of flooding. And without insurance, you might be left paying out of pocket completely.
Yes, be reliant solely on community capabilities and maybe some non-governmental organizations, charitable organizations to help you rebuild. But once again, they're going to be limited in the amount of help they can provide for a large number of flooding structures.
Well, we're right here in the middle of spring, and hurricane season's just around the corner. We know that there's that 30-day waiting period before a policy kicks in. Where should people go to start this process now?
You should immediately contact your insurance provider. Start with whoever does carry your homeowner's insurance and see if they are able to write flood insurance policies. If not, you can go online and simply type in flood insurance in your area and see who pops up. You can get a quote. I encourage multiple quotes. Not that you're price shopping, because all the rates are based on FEMA schedules, but you should be looking for someone who is knowledgeable and experienced in writing flood insurance. That can make all the difference in the world if you have an agent who's been through this and knows the process. It can help the claim process. It can help any type of appeals process. It can also make sure that you're being properly rated. Too many times agents have unfortunately made mistakes, some of them at closing time when homeowners think they're going to pay $500-600 a year for flood insurance, and when the underwriters get a hold of it, they find out there was an error in the writing process, and in reality, that flood insurance premiums jumped up to $2,000-2,500 a year. Big difference. So don't shop around for price matching. Shop around to make sure that they're knowledgeable and experienced writing flood insurance. The 30-day wait can't be waived. There's few exceptions. If you are closing on a home, you get an exception there. So that's great. You can have flood insurance right there. And if you're also closing on a new home, I would encourage you to seek if the existing owner has an existing policy and have that assigned over to the new owner. That will carry over any benefits the existing owner has, such as grandfathering or some types of reduced rates. So by assigning it to the new owner, carries over those benefits. It's a great benefit that to have. But if it's someone who owns their home now and they have it paid out, mandatory purchase is not a requirement, and they want to be protected for the upcoming hurricane season, their 30-day wait will apply. And it's something that you should take seriously. Once there's storms happening, it's nonstop. Last year was nonstop, event after event after event. So get yourself protected now. Get that 30-day wait behind you. Buy whatever level of coverage you can afford. It doesn't matter if it's $40, $50, $60, $100,000. Any coverage for flood insurance is going to be better than nothing.
Right, and just think about, trying to work that into a budget may be hard for some folks, but trying to recover if you've lost your home can be a lot harder.
Absolutely.
Well, Gilbert, is there a website you want to point folks to for some more information?
Yes, we have floodsmart.gov. It's a great website. It's designed for not only the general public, but also real estate and insurance professionals can go up there and look and see what we have to offer. It's a great tool. It has links for other things such as a map service center, the National Flood Hazard View Layer, which is a great product as well. I would encourage your listeners to get on these sites, actually play with them. They're interactive. If I can get what I need out of them, anyone can, because technology is not my strong point. But please understand your area. Talk to your local floodplain administrator. Foster a relationship with them. Determine what kind of risk you actually reside in. If you're in zone X, does not mean you're not going to flood. It just means that you're less likely to flood. Understand what the differences are in the zones. Are you in an A zone? Are you in an AE zone? What does that mean? By fostering a relationship with the local floodplain administrator, you get a better understanding, and this will help your listeners make informed decisions as they move forward.
Yeah, more information is always good. Well, thanks, Gilbert. Great information as usual. And if you have questions about other kinds of insurance, please do visit the Texas Department of Insurance website. That's tdi.texas.gov. Or if you have a specific question, you can get help from our helpline. That's 800-252-3439. So for Gilbert Giron, I'm Ben Gonzalez. This is TDI.